So just to repeat that you have to, we encourage you to participate interactively, ask questions, and if you have some other from your practice and on the presentation. So Marta was kindly prepared some lecture on 2 cases, right? On thrombolysis that may be reflecting real life, and then we can have discussion during the presentation as well. So Marta, please.
Okay. So yes, please interact us and make all the questions, because this is the idea of the workshop, that we combine knowledge. So I have prepared 2 cases. One of these is a real case and the other one no. But this, so I can, that's my disclosures. So this is the real one.
You have to decide which one is the real one.
Yeah. So this, imagine you are working in a comprehensive healthcare center, and you are on call, and you receive a call from the EMS that tells you there's a 57-year-old female, hypertensive, who presents with somnolence, deep rate hemiplegia, and severe aphasia. So I put here the 3 questions that we should rapidly think in a code stroke. That's when, what, and why not. So when, you always need to know the symptoms onset. So this woman was a witness stroke. Somebody saw the onset of the symptoms 2.5 hours ago. And then what does she have? She has a race scale of 8 and a total anterior cerebral infarction symptoms.
Are you familiar with the race scale? Marta, can you elaborate?
Yes.
Oh,
It's easier with the slides. So yes. There are several clinical pre-hospital scales that has been developed to try to identify those patients that will probably have a large vessel occlusion. And I don't know if you are familiar with the NIH scale. That's the scale we use the neurologists to do the examination of the patients. It's a bit complex scale, and the race scale is a simplified NIHSS with less items, and there is a range from 0 to 9. So if you have a race scale higher or equal than 5, you have more than 80% of possibilities of having a large vessel occlusion. So we know before the patient arrives to the hospital that it's a probably candidate for endovascular treatment. Okay?
Even if you use another scale, pre-hospital scale, in your practice with the EMS, we use in our country, in Israel, we use the FAST class. Everybody knows FAST, right? Face, arm, speech, and time. Go to the hospital as soon as possible with the ambulance. And the plus is eye deviation, which usually indicates large stroke, and neglect. So all the EMS, all the ambulances, also the drivers as well as well-trained paramedics, knows how to evaluate it. So if you have above 4, each one of these items gets a point. If you have above 4, it's probably you have a large vessel occlusion. So you can use, this is a well-known race.
Yes. The important thing that there are various scales that can be performed by the technicians in the EMS. You don't need to be a clinic to do this scale. So in Catalonia, actually, almost 2,000 EMS technicians has been trained to do the race, and the majority of our patients, they arrive with the scale race measured. So this patient has a raise of 9, so she has a very high probability of having a large vessel occlusion. So why not? You remember that in my presentation I said that all patients should be considered a reperfusion candidate unless contraindications. So for what we know, this woman doesn't have any contraindication. We need to know that she's hemodynamically stable, but she is, blood pressure and glycemia are correct. And then what about coagulation and platelets? The patient is still in the EMS, he didn't arrive in the ambulance, he didn't arrive to our ER. So what do you think? Should we wait until the patients come, we take the blood sample and wait for the results? No.
Yes.
No, exactly. There are several trials that have demonstrated that the majority of patients that don't have any previous history of coagulopathy or that they are not who are not treated with Coumadin or with any clear antecedent, you don't need to wait for the results of the coagulation of the blood counts. And it's in the American Highlands is said that only you need to know the glycemia because the patient could have a hypoglycemia. That's the cause of the symptoms, but you don't need to wait to any other blood test to give IVTPA. So then, okay, I know what is coming to my hospital and I need to decide which is the best way for her during the flow in the hospital to try to give her the treatment as quick as possible. So here is very unique in my hospital, but there are other ways. Everybody has ways to reduce times in the workflow. But for example, we divide the patients according to their symptoms. We go with the patient to the ER if we think he's not stable hemodynamically or may have is not clear the possibility of a stroke. But the great majority of our patients go to the CT scan, and then we don't have to go to the ER, CT, again ER, then angio. So we go directly to the CT scan and we give the IVTPA bolus if indicated in the CT scan bed.
May I ask you, who actually activates the CT code or the ER code? It is a nurse or physician?
The EMS call the neurology on call, who is a neurology resident, and the neurology resident activates all the team. So we stroke neurologists, we go to the door of the ER to wait for the patient, and we also call the neurointerventionalist.
If the patient comes in without an ambulance, by himself, who activates it?
Then there is a nurse in the triage of the ER. But that...
in our place it's just the same. So we decided that the nurse will activate it because if you ask the internal medicine guy in the ER, you will find many causes, not to say, oh, this is not a stroke, forget it. So we thought that we don't need anyone to think. If there is a stroke code, no one is going to cancel the stroke code until the neurologist will come in. So if the patient comes in with no pre-notification by the ER, by the EMS, then the nurse, triage nurse, will activate the code, and usually triage nurse is the one that was trained to be a stroke trustee nurse.
That's a possibility. What we do also is that one of our nurses from the stroke unit goes to the CT or to the angio suite to help to put the IV and to help with the constants and everything. And in selected patients, where there is a pre-notification and a high probability of large vessel occlusion, and it's a short time from symptoms onset, we transfer directly the patient to the angio suite, and we perform all the procedures of the patient in the angio suite. So that's when the time starts with the patient. Sorry. And then we perform a CT scan in the own arc of the angio. So that's the majority of the arteriography arc that we use for treating patients have the possibility of doing a non-contrast CT. So the important thing is that you need to have a non-contrast CT before doing any kind of reperfusion therapy and to rule out hemorrhage. But you don't need to have a very high quality CT because, as we have commented before, the probability that this patient with only 2 hours of symptoms onset will have a very, very severe established ischemic strokes are below 10%. So if you have a good CT, not very sophisticated, you can give IVTPA. So in this woman, we gave IVTPA in the angio suite. You can use aspects if you feel more secure, but I tell you, you shouldn't lose time doing aspects and doing very sophisticated techniques to do to give IVTPA.
You divide the brain into 10 regions, you can see here on the slide, and then you can count how many of the regions have already maybe hypodensity lesions. So you count down. The lower the score, the bigger the infarct. Okay? It's usually we said it below 5 or 5 or 6. You don't go for thrombectomy because they already have a very right infarct in the brain. So so you have to it's easy if you get used to look at the scan in these particular levels and to scan it and see how many of the regions, then you can give an aspect score, which is in most of the clinical trials that you know about thrombectomy, they were above 6, but most of them were 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, if you are interested, actually, there is in the aspects was created in the University of Alberta in Canada, and there is they have a web page, and you can go and you can make a training on evaluating CT scans. So, but I tell you, if the patients arrive to a hospital especially below 3 hours, it will be exceptional that you won't have to treat it with IVTPA or with thrombectomy because of the unestablished lesion. Because we know that the majority of the patients don't have this established lesion in so few time. So, and even so, if you can recanalize these arteries, probably you will provide a good outcome for these patients, even with low aspects. But there are some clinical trials studying this, the effect of thrombectomy on patients with aspect score below 5. So this woman had a good outcome, a good CT scan. So what we know, we should give IVTPA on all candidate patients, even if they are going to be treated with thrombectomy. But we don't have to wait to see if the IVTPA works until going to thrombectomy. So we just do it simultaneously. We gave the IVTPA bolus. Immediately we did the femoral puncture, and we saw an M1 occlusion. We did a thrombectomy with solitaire. And we after 2 phases of solitaire, we have a complete recanalization. This is a TK3, This is TK1, this is TK3, and this was done below 1 hour from the patient arrival to the hospital. So you can do things very quick for the patients. And it's important because you will see the results if you work quick. This woman had 24 hours, a minimum infarction, deep infarction in the left MCA, and an NAHSS of 2, so a dramatic clinical improvement.
2 points to stress, I think, at least from my point of view, that when you start the IV TPA before thrombectomy, you stop the IV TPA once.
No, we continue. We
stop because our interventionist does not like to have to do it when the TPA is running inside, because at least they think that in the beginning we did the same like you, and then we found out that it increased the risk of bleeding during the therapy.
Well, actually, we continue because there is not a demonstration of this.
What is the point to continue?
Was because I think in some patients you want to arrive, you want to reach at TK3, and actually if you see with bad eyes the clinical trials, the TK3, so not TK2B. So in the thrombectomy trials, to say that a patient has a complete recanalization, he has a TK2B or 3, okay? But it's not the same. TK2B means that you reperfuse half of the territory occluded, and TK3 is a complete reperfusion. But the majority of the thrombectomy trials, the TK3 was below 20% of rate. So there are a lot of people where you can only reach a TK2B. Maybe these patients who have very distal occlusions that you cannot recanalize with the catheter will benefit for the IVTPA.
But on the other hand, you may fragment the clot, and then you have a distal traveling of the clot, fragmented part of the clot downstream, because it's still in the back, because of the IVTPA, and then we come with the catheter and with the stent trigger into the clot breaks, and then it goes downstream. So that's why at least we stop the IVTPA once the punch of the groin.
That's a great debate. Actually, there is a clinical trial who will compare in those patients that you can do a very quick thrombectomy. They will randomize them to do primary thrombectomy versus IVTPA if you can give both treatments in the same time, approximately. So I hope we will be able to answer these questions. Sorry? We are going to participate in that.
After you stop, then you give, after the procedure, you still giving PA?
No.
So one stop never...
You don't continue, at least in our practice. But it's different.
Yeah, it's not... You cannot find specifically in the literature if you have to stop or not. In my own hospital, there are different management. One of my colleagues, when he reached the TK2B, he stops the perfusion of IVTPA. I don't like to stop IVTPA. I give the complete treatment, but that's you cannot. There is no evidence.
I have a question regarding this combination TPA and intervention. When in the cardiology world we moved from the thrombolysis to catheter intervention, we had a transition time to figure out what is the best combination. Sometimes we tried half thrombolysis and to some sort of bridging. Eventually it turned out to be the best to just rush as fast as possible to the cath lab And in the brain, you use the thrombolysis with the same protocol as it has been used before, and add the thrombectomy on top.
Yeah.
Do you think that with more experience, with better understanding, the tuning between the two will evolve, so it will be half doses, other timing, anything?
In my opinion, the point is that you guys, the cardiologists, you can go directly to the cath lab. And you have the cath lab 24/7 all the time. We need, at least in my place, first of all, I need to call the interventionalist, if it's, let's say, 2 a.m. in the morning. Then you need to go to ask the team. It's our own call. They are not in the hospital around the clock. I'm not sure if whether in Barcelona is the same. And then by the time this angio suite is ready, it takes from 1 hour to 90 minutes to arrange everything. So that's why in many instances you start IV TPA, and usually it goes the whole 1 hour drink. Unless we have for some reason the interventionist is in-house, and the nurse is in-house, and the physiologist is in-house, etc. So that's why. But you don't need it. You don't need it. You have everything in-house 24/7.
Well, in a hospital, the interventional cardiologists are at home, and they have to arrive to the hospital when there is a
There's an alarm setting where you have the maximum allowed time.
90 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
The guidance says 90 minutes.
Yeah.
For you, it's 90 minutes? For
Yes.
the interventional cardiologist, 90 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, we should, of course, in the guidelines in the stroke, that's the objective, to have a limit of time for the interventionalist to be in the hospital. And
Please, the Israeli guidelines, not guidelines, the quality indicators for the Ministry of Health, that each hospital should report every quarter for it's 90 minutes for the ST or for the catheter.
yeah, I think it's not the same if you are at the hospital and you can give both techniques at the same time. So maybe in this case, thrombectomy alone is better. But if you can give IVTPA 1 hour before, in some patients it works.
The guidelines, at least, again, the quality indicators, at least, I think America is the same. It's door to city 25 minutes, and those who arrive to the hospital within 3.5 hours. Door to IV TPA, door to needle is 60 minutes. These are the current quality indicators each hospital should report to the government.
In Catalonia we have 30 minutes.
All the ER very efficient. When you have to report to someone, he will start to run. But we don't have any quality indicators for thrombectomy yet. No.
Actually, we have it in Catalonia. We have 90 minutes of time maximum for door to growing.
So just a short question in Barcelona where you work. It's, so you have 24 hours, 7 days, and neurologists being in charge doing intervention?
No, we have 24 hours, 7 days, and a neurologist and a neurology resident in the hospital, and then there is a stroke neurologist and neurointerventionalist at home that should arrive to the hospital below 1 hour.
Okay. So the intervention is performed by a neuroradiologist? Or
Well, we have 3 people doing calls,
Right.
two neuroradiologists and 1 neurologist who is also interventionalist.
right.
Yeah, but we need to have at least a stroke physician or a resident on duty in order to assess. The first assessment is done by the first responder is the neurologist, the on call. Then we have a stroke physician on call 24/7.
Yeah, and we in Catalonia, what we have also is a good telestroke network. So if the patient arrives to a primary center where there is not a neurologist in the hospital, they call the telestroke, and there is a stroke neurologist who takes care of all the coded strokes in Catalonia telematically. So,
we know every minute counts. We know about all these delays. What do you think about approach where diagnostics and therapy come to the patient? I think about mobile stroke unit, where in case of suspected stroke, EMS car with a dedicated head CT scanner is then in the place where the patient is. This is possible today. There is also the technology out there that then automatically reads the CT images. Eventually via teleservices, a radiologist confirms there is no bleeding. And if then there is no obvious contraindication against lysis, then eventually start the thrombolysis, here Chiletnat 20.
Actually, in Berlin, there is a mobile stroke unit in several cities in USA. Yeah, there are some.
Increasing, I have a slide with the map of all the mobile stroke
but
it's not very. It's not the cost is not the ambulance. For 700, 800,000 euros or dollars, you buy the ambulance. Question is the personnel to pay. That's on there because you need a technician, at least by regulation in the United States, also in Israel, you need a CT technician on board, and you need the personnel to pay for paramedic.
And you can imagine you have one stroke ambulance, so one mobile stroke unit for which extension of place. So maybe in a big city with very deep traffic, it makes some sense. But if I think of a more rural places, that's the main problem of these patients. If you live, your problem is not if you live in Barcelona or Berlin. Probably the main problem is if you live in a very far away small village, and they have you won't be able to send the mobile stroke unit and take 2 hours to arrive there and then 2 hours to come back. So it's a partial solution. It's very effective. Of course, you will give the treatment very quick, but for a very few percentage of patients, in my opinion, it won't.
But currently, RTPA or whatever lysis is also only a therapy for only in real life. How many people actually get RTPA? Also in the developed systems, also in Berlin or Barcelona. I suppose also in Barcelona it's single digits of the overall. And one has to start. Yeah, and I think one has to start. And if in the beginning you want a 100% perfect solution, you will never get anything. And with stuff like, who do we need a CT technician? Where I was working as emergency physician, the EMS personnel was trained to intubate, I'm a cardiologist, to intubate, to defibrillate the patients, and it had you can do it, you do not need a medical degree to do this.
You cannot perform a CT scan by yourself, even if you know how to do it. This is by regulation.
Yeah, then eventually the boards should approach politics and also the medical societies that for some specific applications then EMS people may be trained. Today these CT scans are very simple to do. I'm quite sure everybody here in the room after half a day could do a CT scan.
In Houston, Texas, they are rich enough, and the guy Jim Grotta, who decided to he was the chairman of the neurology department, and he decided to leave and to leave the department and live on the ambulance. Even there, he could not actually manage to do it 24/7. So he started with 3 days a week, not all day. So this is the problem.
Yeah, but once you have to start.
The main problem is that you will. I don't think that in Barcelona, that's where I know. I don't think it will change too much my times if the patient receive IVTPA in the street below his house or in my hospital that it's 10 minutes of distance. So I'm not sure it's gonna be a change of.
The question is cost effectiveness.
In Berlin, this trial was run with the STEMO, where we had this
in-car CT scanner and the full team of a technician and a doctor and a nurse driving there and doing the scan on the site, and it was heavily criticized at the beginning as a very expensive toy. Doesn't work in a rural area because travel time is anyway too long to get to a place 3 hours away, and then the data was coming in and showing some success. So now we are in negotiation, or I don't know how far we advanced already, to get in a second car. But I mean, still the limitations are there with a technician, with the rural area and transport, but at least the success is there. And I think because you said 10 minutes, the average time that has been published to improve from this is just a couple of minutes, but it's the average time that includes also those where something went wrong or something. So in an individual case, it can be much more than just 12 minutes or so. So that's why, I mean, since money should not be the issue, this is really something to improve, at least in some areas, significantly, the treatment.
The question is always whether this will improve just the time or the outcome of the patient. That you can reduce the time to needle, onset to needle, if you do it on the ambulance. But if you look at the data, the first data from STEMO was not shown to have a clinical beneficial effect. This was in the JAMA at the time. But now we have enough evidence to show that if you give it earlier on the ambulance, you may improve also the patient's outcome. But as Mother said, if you have a very well-oiled machinery to transfer the patient as soon as possible, you don't gain much.
Well, that's a matter of a clinical trial. That's where they are doing in Berlin. So you need to demonstrate that, almost in Spain, if you want the government to pay it, you will need to demonstrate that it really works. So we are not yet in this.
So to be provocative, your interpretation is that what we saw yesterday from this Jacobson Institute in Buffalo, that it's absolute waste of money when they invest a lot of money in combined CT angio suite, and the rationale that we heard yesterday was to save these 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, transfer them from the CT to the angio.
It's not 2 5 minutes.
You said 90 minutes.
It's not 2 for 5 minutes.
It's more than 4 or 5 minutes. This is not 10 minutes, it's more than 90 minutes to prepare the angio suite. If you have a patient goes directly from the CT scan to the angio suite.
We have 20 minutes of time. If we compare in my hospital, we compare those patients where we give IVTPA in the CT scan and we give it in the angio suite, it's 20 minutes of difference. So yes, the same that your ambulance, but it's a bit more cheaper.
Okay. Where are you practicing?
Who would be so brave to give IVTPA in the ambulance? Would you?
Yeah, I did in my function. The cardiologist
What
No,
was the
in
RTPA?
ambulance cardiologists do not give TPA in ambulance.
I gave it. When the patient was in poor condition, I did it. I had it with me. I know I was an exception.
Where do you practice?
In Germany.
What part of Germany?
Rubiera.
Because of
Yeah, but I think with all these limitations when we come, is it allowed to do the regulations?
No, probably Bavaria because of the geographic settings.
But you are afraid of giving my ETA in the ambulance? That's it?
No, so that was my question. Who would be so brave to give IVTPA in the ambulance? I wouldn't.
With CT scan?
No, independently. Because I'm a cardiologist and so our definition of myocardial infarction is very fast and we can do ECG and in fact we could do it in ambulance. And there were not so brave doctors to do it. So it means that we in Poland we go for a completely different organization of the myocardial infarction treatment. So we invest in a very tight network of cath labs, and that's why we probably in very rare cases we use TPA because we don't need to. We have cath labs.
But we don't have any chance. I mean,
So
that's probably the only approved so far.
But maybe it's the same direction to go with neurologists and to make more cath labs referred for.
Yeah, now we are testing it, whether going to the cath lab is better than to give IVT in the bridging concept.
The difference is that for systemic patients, we have data that the primary PCI is better than thrombolysis, and it's better than thrombolysis with PCI.
And then
So
thrombolysis were for patients who were
thrombolysis for
stable.
very small part of patients. But we haven't such data for.
We currently there are several studies running, direct versus bridging, because in the thrombectomy trials, 83% of the patients actually received IV TPA plus thrombectomy, which means that these are the data. Now, where subgroup analysis show that actually the direct thrombectomy is as efficacious as the bridging. So now there is currently randomized control study testing this. It's probably that I believe that like the cardiologist, you let us do the TPA. Now you let us do it from the PCI to thrombectomy. I'm sure that direct thrombectomy probably will be the best way to do it. But we need the data to prove it.